Welcome to Traveler's Tales. I am your host, Greg Alonzo. Today I will be your guide through history as we take a look at ancient Rome's ladies of the night. Moving right along, mythology tells us one thing, while archaeology tells us another. Was prostitution legal in ancient Rome? Was prostitution seen as socially acceptable? Was it actually licensed by the government? Today we will answer these questions as we take a look at what many consider to be the world's oldest profession. Let's begin with, was prostitution legal in ancient Rome? Prostitution was not only legal, it was also licensed by the government. To the Romans, sexual behavior was not moralized. What was important was such conduct was held in moderation. Men of any social status were free to engage in sex with prostitutes, either female or male, without incurring moral disapproval. Since prostitution was legal and part of the culture of ancient Rome, brothels were required to be licensed. Most prostitutes were female slaves or freed women. The balance of voluntary to forced prostitution can only be guessed at. Privately held slaves were considered property under Roman law. Due to this ruling, it was legal for an owner to employ them as prostitutes. However, pimping and prostitution were considered disgraceful and dishonorable activities. Not only that, such practices were deemed infamous for citizens and typically meant loss of reputation as well as loss of many rights and privileges attached to citizenship. Slave-owning patrons and investors may have sought to avoid such losses by appointing slaves or freedmen to manage their clandestine investments. Let's take a look at Roman brothels. They were known as lupanar or lupinarium, which come from the root word for she-wolf. Regular brothels were typically exceedingly dirty. They smelled of characteristic odors lingering in poorly ventilated spaces, while those brothels who aspired to a loftier clientele had hairdressers on hand and water boys for washing up. These brothels were adorned with murals of the sex acts offered on the premises. Latin literature makes frequent reference to prostitutes who had acquired some degree of respectability and were seen as high-class call girls. Since some prostitutes were self-employed, they would typically rent a room for work. It was quite common to rent from the local madam, or Lena as she was called. This enabled the call girl's client to take full use of the amenities offered by the brothel. Such call girls were known to the Romans as meretrix. However, in the poetry of the day, she was popularized as a puella, meaning girlfriend. These women were oftentimes freed. Having her freedom, why then would she resort to a life of turning tricks? Most likely for the age-old reason of needing money. The women who worked out of bathhouses or taverns had a procurer or a pimp, who was known as a leno. His primary purpose was to provide the women with clients as well as protection. Did prostitutes work the streets of ancient Rome? Yes, in the hierarchy of prostitutes in ancient Rome, these women were known by the derogatory name as scortum. Another name, which was purely euphemistic, was amica. These unescorted ladies of the night usually applied their trade in the back alleys and the local graveyard. Granted, they had no overhead, but obviously she worked at a high risk of being robbed, not paid, or assaulted. Even though prostitution was legal, she had no legal recourse to the law. On an interesting note, women in ancient Rome who went out unescorted were often mistakenly seen as prostitutes. Roman prostitutes had no social standing and were disgraced. They were perceived as infamous persons. Life could be harsh in ancient Rome. Prostitution was an attempt to escape destitution. However, was prostitution truly an out? After all, these women lost whatever social standing they had, and they were seen as infamous. This brings us to the end of ancient Rome's ladies of the night. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Traveler's Tales. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the little bell icon to be notified each time we post new videos. Until we meet again at the crossroads of folklore and fact, Cartistos.